Hello everyone, in this video I'm going to be looking at the different types of white blood cells that we have in our body. Now, I've made numerous immunological videos on this channel. There's some on monoclonal antibodies, some on vaccines. So this one I'm going to specifically just look at the white blood cells, not about how they essentially function, but just the different varieties that we have. Now, to start with, I just want to draw a very quick test tube, and I want you to imagine that we had a test tube, and in that test tube was all the blood that somebody had. I just want you to imagine that tube was all the blood that somebody has. Now, in an average healthy person, about 45% of the blood volume is actually cells. So of that, 45% of the blood is cellular. And when we think about the cells, we're thinking about the red blood cells, we're thinking about white blood cells, and we're also thinking about something called the platelets. So I just want to put that out there, just so we know what we're really dealing with. So 45% of all blood is comprised of these three cells. Now, white blood cells is what we're going to look at. So I'm just going to make a few little bullet points, if you like, some key points about white blood cells. White blood cells are larger than red blood cells. If I put RBC, they're actually called, red blood cells are called erythrocytes. So white blood cells, and I'll come to the proper name of them in a moment, are actually larger. There's actually fewer, though, white blood cells than red blood cells. There's about one white for every 600 red. So it's in a ratio of 1 to 600 white to red. So we have a lot less of the white compared to the red, but they're a lot larger. Now, the main job of the white blood cell is to protect against infection. Like red blood cells, they're made in bone marrow, and I'll talk more specifically about that in a moment. But unlike red blood cells, they contain a central nucleus, and many can change shape. So white blood cells are properly known as, and we'll put this term at the top, as leukocytes. Leucocytes. That's the correct scientific name for white blood cells, leukocytes. Now, broadly speaking, we can divide those leukocytes into two categories: phagocytes and lymphocytes. So we're first of all going to talk about the phagocytes. So in the white blood cells, we're going to put into two categories. So we have two categories of white blood cell. We have phagocytes and lymphocytes. So let's start with the phagocytes. Phagocytes destroy invading microorganisms by a process called phagocytosis. And there is a video I've done on the method of phagocytosis. So phagocytes destroy invading microorganisms by this process, and they're recognized by granular cytoplasm and lobed nuclei. So before I compare phagocytes with lymphocytes, let's talk about the different types of phagocytes we have. We have neutrophils. Now, neutrophils, and in green I'm going to show this, neutrophils are in this top box here. So I have 5 pictures of white blood cells. Neutrophils are this one at the top. Neutrophils form about 60% of all white blood cells. They patrol the circulation and the tissues by squeezing out the capillaries. They're released in large numbers during an infection, and they're very short-lived. So we have neutrophils there. We have in this third box pictures of what are called eosinophils. So in fact, we'll write down the names here. So at the top we have, in terms of the different types of phagocytes, we have neutrophils, and here we have eosinophils. Now, eosinophils respond to parasitic infections and allergic conditions. Now we also have down at the bottom a type of white blood cell called the monocyte. Monocyte. Now monocytes are the precursors for what are called macrophages. Once circulating monocytes enter tissues, they're converted into what are called macrophages, depends how you say it, and macrophages break up invaders to expose antigens to the lymphocytes. So those monocytes engulf the cellular debris and are involved in a process called antigen processing and antigen presentation, which I talk about in another video. So we've talked about neutrophils, eosinophils and monocytes. There is another that I've not mentioned, and it's the second picture down on this list here, and these are basophils, and they're involved in hypersensitivity and the release of histamine. So we've put in place some information there about the phagocytes, the neutrophils, basophils, eosinophils and monocytes. Now let's think about the lymphocytes. So the second category of white blood cell or leukocyte. Lymphocytes are important because they are smaller than phagocytes. They have a large round nucleus, and in fact I'm just going to put here this second picture here. This second picture from the bottom is of lymphocytes. Now you can notice straight away that the nucleus here is different than that, for example, if we compare it with this one up here that I've just circled in green. Lymphocytes have a large round nucleus and only a small amount of cytoplasm. Now the job of the lymphocytes is to destroy invaders by producing antibodies or by killing invading pathogens directly. So let's now look in more detail about the lymphocytes. Because each lymphocyte is specialised to respond to one antigen only. They circulate throughout the blood and a fluid called lymph, so they can come into contact with any pathogens and even each other. And by pathogen I mean an organism that can cause disease. Now we have two types, B and T cells, B and T lymphocytes, and they interact with each other for effective defence. So let's talk about the different types that we have. So in terms of lymphocytes we have B cells, but we also have T cells. Now B cells generally divide and secrete antibodies into the blood. They arise from stem cells in the bone marrow, and they actually mature in the bone marrow, hence why they're called B cell. B is for like bone, if you like. So the B cells mature in bone marrow, and their job is to produce antibodies in response to antigens. And they respond to foreign material outside of body cells and things like bacteria and viruses. So that's what the B cells do. The T cells arise from stem cells in the bone marrow, just like the B cells, but they mature in the thymus gland, and that's why they have a T. So they mature in a different place. Now they respond to foreign material inside body cells, and they can respond to our own cells altered by viruses or cancer and to transplanted tissues. So those T cells are divided into two types. We have, I'll just make a note of these two here. These two cells can either be killer or helper. So the T helper cells are the ones that release chemicals which stimulate B cells. So we've got a whole group of T cells here that when are active, these helper T cells, they stimulate more of the B cells, the ones that produce the antibodies. The killer T cells are the ones that attach to disease cells in the body and release a toxin to kill the cell and the pathogen. So you can see two different slight functions there. So just to summarise, we have white blood cells called leukocytes, divided into two categories, phagocytes, which destroy invading microorganisms by phagocytosis, and lymphocytes, which come under two really umbrellas, B and T cells. B cells that divide to secrete antibodies into the blood, and T cells that can either stimulate the B cell or can actually go and release toxins to destroy cells and pathogens themselves. That's just a little bit about the white blood cell. Okay, hope all that helps.